In 1943, renowned psychiatrist Dr. Harvey Cleckley encountered a patient who would forever change his understanding of human manipulation. The patient, a charming businessman named Richard, had systematically destroyed 3 marriages, embezzled from multiple companies, and yet maintained an impeccable public reputation. But what disturbed Cleckley wasn't Richard's crimes. It was what happened when his final victim, Sarah, began to see through his facade. Sarah had endured years of psychological warfare, gaslighting, isolation, financial control, and the gradual erosion of her identity. By all accounts, she should have been broken. Instead, something extraordinary occurred. In their final confrontation, documented in Cleckley's private notes, Sarah displayed what he called crystalline clarity, an almost supernatural ability to see through Richard's manipulations in real time, predict his moves, and respond with surgical precision. It was as if, Cleckley wrote, the victim had become immune to the very toxins that once poisoned her mind. More than immune, she had developed antibodies that could neutralize the manipulator's power entirely. This wasn't recovery, this was transformation. This was what we now recognize as the final evolutionary stage in the narcissistic abuse cycle, the moment when the survivor transcends victimhood and becomes something the narcissist cannot comprehend, cannot control, and cannot defeat. A conscious observer who sees the game for exactly what it is. But here's what most people don't realize about this final stage. It's not just about healing from abuse. It's about accessing a form of psychological mastery that most humans never develop, a level of emotional intelligence and pattern recognition that can be applied far beyond toxic relationships. The survivors who reach this stage don't just escape their abusers. They emerge with capabilities that border on the supernatural. If you've ever found yourself trapped in a cycle with someone who seemed to drain your energy, manipulate your emotions, or make you question your own reality, then what happened to Sarah holds the key to understanding not just how to break free, but how to emerge stronger than you ever thought possible. Perhaps you've noticed that certain people seem to have an almost magnetic pull on your attention, your resources, your peace of mind. Maybe you've wondered why some individuals can walk away from toxic situations unscathed, while others remain trapped for years. Or perhaps you've experienced that strange phenomenon where after a particularly draining encounter, you found yourself questioning things you were once certain about. What Cleckley discovered in his work with Sarah and dozens of similar cases was that there exists a predictable pattern, a psychological evolution that occurs when someone is pushed beyond their normal limits of tolerance. But this evolution doesn't happen automatically. It requires specific conditions, specific recognitions, and most importantly, specific stages of development that most people never complete. The survivors who reach what we call the final stage don't just recover from narcissistic abuse, they develop what researchers now term predator immunity, the ability to instantly recognize manipulative patterns, maintain emotional equilibrium under psychological pressure, and respond to toxic behavior with strategic precision rather than emotional reactivity. This isn't about becoming cold or cynical. It's about achieving a level of psychological sophistication that transforms you into someone who cannot be manipulated, cannot be diminished, and cannot be controlled by anyone who operates through fear, guilt, or deception. Stage 1. The Recognition Protocol. The journey to psychological immunity begins with what Dr. Cleckley termed the moment of crystalline recognition, that split second when the survivor suddenly sees the entire manipulation matrix with perfect clarity. It's not a gradual awakening, it's more like a lightning strike of understanding that illuminates everything that was previously hidden. Dr. Martha Stout, in her work with trauma survivors, documented this phenomenon extensively. She describes patients who, after months or years of confusion, suddenly experienced what she called reality downloads, moments when all the gaslighting, lies, and manufactured confusion collapsed, revealing the true nature of their situation. Take the case of Michael, a successful attorney who spent 3 years in a relationship with someone who systematically dismantled his confidence, isolated him from friends, and convinced him he was developing memory problems. The recognition moment came during what seemed like a routine argument. She was mid-sentence telling me how I had promised something I knew I never promised, Michael recalls. And suddenly I could see it, not just this lie, but the entire pattern. It was like seeing a magic trick explained. Once you know how it works, you can never be fooled by it again. This recognition isn't just cognitive, it's neurological. Brain imaging studies show that survivors experiencing this breakthrough display increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function and reality testing, while showing decreased activation in areas associated with emotional reactivity. They literally become more rational and less emotionally vulnerable in real time. The practical application of this stage involves developing what we call pattern recognition protocols. Start documenting interactions objectively. Record conversations if legal. Keep a journal focused not on feelings, but on facts and sequences of events. The goal is to build an evidence base that your rational mind can reference when emotional manipulation attempts to cloud your judgment. But here's where most people get stuck. They mistake the recognition for the solution. Seeing the manipulation is just the beginning. The real transformation happens in the stages that follow. Stage 2, the emotional firewall. Once recognition occurs, survivors must develop what psychologist Dr. George Simon calls emotional firewalls, sophisticated psychological defenses that prevent manipulative tactics from penetrating their mental space. This isn't about building walls. It's about developing selective permeability. Consider the work of Dr. Judith Herman with political prisoners who had been subjected to systematic psychological torture. Those who maintained their mental integrity shared a common trait. They had learned to separate their core identity from external attempts to define or diminish them. They developed what she termed identity fortification, an unshakable sense of self that remained intact regardless of external psychological pressure. Lisa, a marketing executive, discovered this principle during her divorce from a psychologically abusive partner. He used to be able to trigger me instantly with certain phrases, calling me crazy or bringing up my past mistakes. But after the recognition stage, something changed. I could hear him saying the same words, but they didn't connect to anything inside me anymore. It was like he was trying to press buttons that no longer existed. Neurologically, what's happening is fascinating. The brain regions responsible for self-referential processing, areas that normally activate when we hear criticism or praise about ourselves, begin to show reduced activity when exposed to manipulative language. Simultaneously, areas associated with third-person observation become more active. The survivor literally begins to experience manipulative attacks as external events rather than personal assaults. The practical technique here involves what we call third-person processing. When exposed to manipulative behavior, consciously shift your perspective from "they are attacking me" to "they are engaging in manipulative behavior." This subtle cognitive shift activates different neural pathways and prevents the emotional hijacking that manipulation depends on. Train yourself to respond to emotional manipulation with curiosity rather than reactivity. That's interesting. They're using guilt now. I wonder what they're trying to achieve. This internal commentary creates psychological distance and maintains your position as an observer rather than a participant in their emotional drama. Stage 3, the strategic response matrix. Third stage represents perhaps the most sophisticated development. Survivors begin to respond to manipulation not reactively, but strategically. They develop the ability to predict manipulative patterns and craft responses that neutralize the manipulator's objectives while maintaining their own psychological equilibrium. Dr. Robert Hare's research with corporate psychopaths revealed that their most effective opponents weren't other psychopaths, but individuals who had learned to think several moves ahead while maintaining emotional stability. These individuals had developed what Hare called strategic empathy, the ability to understand the manipulator's motivations and methods without being emotionally affected by them. Take the case of David, a software engineer whose business partner was systematically trying to push him out of their company using psychological manipulation. At first, I would react to each incident individually, getting defensive, trying to prove my worth, explaining myself constantly. Then I started seeing the pattern. He wasn't just being difficult, he was following a playbook. Once I understood the playbook, I could predict his moves and prepare responses that frustrated his objectives. David learned to document everything, respond to accusations with requests for written clarification, and maintain professional boundaries that prevented emotional manipulation from affecting business decisions. Within months, his partner's tactics became ineffective and eventually stopped entirely. This stage involves developing response protocols for common manipulative tactics. For gaslighting, I'm confident in my recollection. Let's refer to our written documentation. For guilt tripping, I understand you're disappointed. My decision remains the same. For threats, I'd like to keep this conversation productive. What specific outcome are you looking for? The key is maintaining calm, clarity, and consistency while refusing to be drawn into emotional reactivity. The manipulator's power comes from their ability to dysregulate your emotions. When that fails, their entire system breaks down. Stage 4, the immunity installation. The fourth stage is where survivors achieve something truly remarkable. They become essentially immune to manipulation. Not just resistant, immune. Manipulative tactics not only fail to achieve their objectives, but often backfire, strengthening the survivor's position instead of weakening it. Dr. Martha Beck's research with high-functioning abuse survivors revealed that those who reached this stage had developed what she called manipulation radar, an almost instantaneous ability to recognize and neutralize manipulative attempts before they could take effect. It's like they had developed psychological antibodies, Beck explained. Exposure to manipulation had trained their systems to recognize and neutralize these patterns automatically. Consider Rachel, a real estate agent who had survived a marriage to someone with severe narcissistic personality disorder. Post-divorce, she found herself in business negotiations with someone using similar tactics. He tried every trick in the book: charm, intimidation, guilt, creating false urgency. But instead of feeling pressured, I felt amused. I could see exactly what he was doing, predict his next moves, and respond in ways that completely neutralized his strategy. It was like watching someone try to pick a lock with the key right in front of them. What's happening neurologically is that the brain has learned to recognize manipulation patterns at a subconscious level and automatically activate protective responses. The amygdala, usually hijacked by manipulative tactics, remains calm, while the prefrontal cortex maintains full executive control. Practically, this stage involves developing automatic response protocols, instant pattern recognition where manipulative behavior triggers analysis, not emotion, automatic boundary enforcement where inappropriate requests are declined without internal conflict, and strategic non-engagement where emotional hooks are identified and ignored. The manipulator finds themselves unable to gain any emotional leverage. Their tactics, instead of creating the desired vulnerability, create clarity and distance. They become increasingly frustrated and often abandon their attempts entirely. Stage 5. The reverse polarity effect. The fifth stage reveals something that borders on the extraordinary. Survivors don't just become immune to manipulation, they often develop the ability to neutralize manipulative individuals entirely. The power dynamic doesn't just balance, it reverses. Dr. Kevin Dutton's research with successful individuals in high-pressure careers revealed that many had developed what he termed psychopath resistance, the ability to remain unaffected by psychopathic manipulation while simultaneously causing psychopaths to lose their effectiveness entirely. It wasn't that these individuals became manipulative themselves, Dutton noted. Rather, their immunity created a field where manipulation simply couldn't function. James, a corporate executive, experienced this phenomenon with a colleague known for destroying careers through office politics and psychological manipulation. After my divorce from someone very similar, I found that his tactics didn't just fail to affect me, they seemed to backfire. Colleagues started noticing his behavior more clearly when he couldn't get the emotional reactions he was used to. His manipulations became visible to everyone. This happens because manipulation depends on emotional reactivity and psychological vulnerability. When someone responds to manipulative attempts with calm clarity, it highlights the manipulator's behavior by contrast. Other people begin to notice patterns they previously missed. The survivor becomes like a psychological mirror, reflecting the manipulator's behavior back to them and to others around them without being affected by it. This often causes the manipulator to become increasingly desperate and obvious in their attempts, ultimately exposing them to everyone in their environment. Practical application involves maintaining calm professionalism in the face of manipulation, asking clarifying questions that expose manipulative intent, documenting patterns that others can observe, and setting boundaries that force manipulators to reveal their true nature. The result is often that manipulative individuals either change their behavior or remove themselves from the survivor's environment entirely. Stage 6. The wisdom transmission. The sixth stage involves something unexpected. Survivors often develop an almost supernatural ability to help others recognize and escape similar situations. They become beacons that help other potential victims avoid the traps they once fell into. Dr. Judith Herman's work with trauma counselors revealed that the most effective therapists working with abuse survivors were often survivors themselves who had reached complete recovery. They possessed something that couldn't be taught in graduate school, Herman observed. They could see through deception instantly, predict manipulation patterns accurately, and guide others to freedom with remarkable precision. This isn't about becoming a savior or rescuer, roles that can recreate unhealthy dynamics. Instead, it's about embodying a level of clarity and strength that naturally inspires others to question their own situations. The survivor's very presence challenges the manipulator's narrative and provides a living example of what's possible. Maria, a teacher who had escaped a psychologically abusive marriage, found that colleagues began approaching her about their own relationship concerns. "I wasn't giving advice or playing therapist," she explains, "but somehow my presence seemed to give people permission to question things they had been accepting." Several colleagues left toxic situations after seeing that it was possible to be happy and strong on your own. This stage involves embodying the change you want to see rather than preaching it, recognizing when someone is ready to hear truth versus when they're not, providing support without taking responsibility for others' choices, and maintaining your own boundaries while being genuinely helpful. The survivor becomes a living proof of possibility, evidence that recovery and strength are achievable. This often has a ripple effect that extends far beyond their immediate circle. Stage 7. The mastery integration. The final stage transcends the original trauma entirely. Survivors don't just recover, they achieve a level of psychological mastery that transforms every area of their life. They develop what researchers call post-traumatic wisdom, capabilities and insights that exceed their pre-trauma baseline. Dr. Richard Tedeschi's research on post-traumatic growth revealed that some individuals don't just return to their previous level of functioning, they achieve capabilities they never possessed before. The struggle with trauma, when successfully resolved, can lead to growth that surpasses the individual's previous psychological capacity, Tedeschi found. These individuals often report enhanced intuition, improved relationship skills, clearer boundaries, stronger sense of purpose, and an almost uncanny ability to recognize authentic versus inauthentic people immediately. They've developed what we might call psychological X-ray vision, the ability to see through facades and understand people's true motivations quickly and accurately. Tom, an entrepreneur who had survived both a psychologically abusive childhood and later a toxic business partnership, found that his experiences had given him abilities that transformed his career. "I can read people incredibly quickly now. I can spot dishonesty, manipulation, genuine distress, hidden potential, things that used to be invisible to me. It's like surviving manipulation gave me superpowers in reading human nature." This final integration involves using hard-won wisdom to make better decisions in all areas of life, trusting intuitive responses that have been sharpened by experience, building relationships based on authenticity rather than manipulation, contributing to others' growth while maintaining personal boundaries, and living from a place of strength rather than fear or reactivity. The survivor has not just escaped their original situation, they've transformed it into a source of power and wisdom that enhances every aspect of their existence. The path to mastery. The journey through these 7 stages doesn't happen automatically or overnight. It requires conscious effort, specific practices, and often professional support. But for those who complete the journey, the transformation is nothing short of revolutionary. Developing manipulation immunity requires consistent daily practice. Start each day with what we call reality anchoring, a 5-minute practice where you review your core values, your boundaries, and your goals. This creates a stable reference point that manipulation cannot shake. Throughout the day, practice pattern recognition exercises. When you interact with people, ask yourself, what is this person trying to achieve? Are they being direct and honest, or are they using indirect methods to influence me? This isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone. It's about developing conscious awareness of social dynamics. End each day with interaction analysis, reviewing your encounters and asking, did I maintain my boundaries? Did I respond from clarity or reactivity? What patterns did I notice? This builds the reflective capacity necessary for continued growth. For those dealing with active manipulation, implement a 3-month intensive protocol. Month 1. Focus entirely on recognition and documentation. Your only goal is to see patterns clearly and record them objectively. Don't try to change anything yet, just observe and document. Month 2. Begin implementing emotional firewalls and strategic responses. Practice the techniques outlined in stages 2 and 3. Expect some pushback as manipulators escalate when their usual tactics stop working. Month 3. Focus on consistency and refinement. By now, you should be experiencing the immunity effects of stage 4. Fine-tune your responses and begin helping others recognize similar patterns. This journey cannot be completed in isolation. You need at least one person who understands manipulation dynamics and can provide objective feedback, professional support if trauma symptoms emerge like flashbacks, dissociation, or severe anxiety, a community of people who value authenticity over manipulation, and educational resources to deepen your understanding of psychological dynamics. Be aware of potential pitfalls. Becoming cynical or suspicious of everyone indicates incomplete processing. Using your knowledge to manipulate others recreates the original problem. Believing you can fix or save other victims leads to unhealthy relationship patterns. Neglecting your own needs while focusing on manipulation dynamics recreates victim mentality. If you notice these patterns, pause the intensive work and focus on basic self-care and boundary setting until you can proceed from a place of strength rather than reactivity. With great power comes great responsibility. Those who develop manipulation immunity must use their abilities ethically. Never use manipulation techniques on others, even for their own good. Respect others' right to make their own choices, even poor ones. Share knowledge only when genuinely requested, not as unsolicited advice. Maintain confidentiality about others' situations and struggles. Continue your own growth and self-awareness rather than assuming you've arrived. The transformation complete. Remember Sarah from our opening story? Dr. Cleckley followed her progress for 15 years after her breakthrough. She didn't just escape her toxic marriage. She became a family therapist specializing in manipulation recovery. She developed assessment tools still used today. She helped hundreds of people recognize and escape similar situations. But the most remarkable thing wasn't her professional success. It was the quality of her daily life. She radiated a kind of unshakable peace, Cleckley wrote in his final notes about her case. Not the peace of someone who had never been tested, but the deep tranquility of someone who had been through fire and emerged stronger. This is what awaits you on the other side of this journey, Not just freedom from manipulation, but a level of psychological mastery that transforms everything. You'll develop intuition that guides you toward authentic relationships and away from toxic ones. You'll possess clarity that cuts through deception instantly. You'll embody strength that inspires others and cannot be diminished by anyone. The manipulators who once seemed so powerful will appear exactly as they are: frightened, fragmented individuals using primitive strategies that no longer work on you. You won't hate them. You'll see them clearly, respond appropriately, and move on to more important matters. Your journey from victim to survivor to master isn't just personal transformation, it's service to everyone around you. Every person who achieves manipulation immunity makes it harder for predators to operate and easier for victims to recognize their situation. The path isn't easy, but it leads to a destination that most people never reach: true psychological freedom. The freedom to be authentically yourself, to trust your instincts, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear or control. You are no longer prey. You are no longer victim. You are no longer at the mercy of anyone who thinks they can control you through manipulation. You have become something far more powerful. Someone who sees clearly, responds wisely, and cannot be diminished by anyone who operates through deception. The final stage awaits. Your transformation begins now.